Okay. Thanks, Hans. So, thanks, Finis. That was really good. Where did Finis go? Very good background. I had not been privy to a lot of that background on the NGNP project, so I learned a lot. Also learned a lot yesterday. This is my first time at INL and was able to take a tour of the facilities. How many has been able to take a tour? Maybe 30%, so not as many, right? Fascinating, and the facilities are absolutely a gem of the U.S. So for those of you that have taken the facility tour, use them if you can. You heard Mark say that INL is open for business, so if you have a need, use the facilities if you have something that you can use them for. If you haven't toured the lab, do it. It's well worth it. We spent the entire day out looking at the facilities, and it's well worth the time. So set up some time to go see the lab complex. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm really honored to be in front of this group. I work for Southern Company, and really my main goal is to support development of new projects that support the advancement of new generation projects for our fleet. And so that is a lot of words that basically says our group is looking towards a low carbon future, and I manage new projects to help us get there. One of those areas is obviously advanced nuclear. So we tend to look in different areas, but one of them is advanced nuclear, and so that's why we're here. Today I plan to go over a couple of different items, so I'll kind of run through them with you now, and then we'll get into a little bit more. I wanted to kind of preface a little bit. I talked about I manage new projects for to support that low carbon future for Southern Company, and what we call it is to produce optionality for our company. So I want you to hold on to that word optionality, because we're going to talk about it. It's kind of going to run a theme through the presentation, so sort of hold on to that. But today we're going to go through really an overview of Southern Company. I'm going to focus on just really what is Southern Company as an overview, and we're also going to talk about our customer-centric focus and how Southern Company really works. And then we're going to talk about what are utilities looking for. You know, what is it that we need from a vendor or from a solution provider? And then obviously we're going to talk about the challenges to get there. And then I want to socialize a little bit with you guys a pathway of potentially getting there. So let's talk a little bit about Southern Company. We're an energy provider, so we have electrical generation and gas transportation and distribution, about 46,000 megawatts, 1,500 billion cubic feet of natural gas consumption and throughput. We have about 9 million customers. Our electrical generation customers are in 4 states, and our gas customers are in 9 states. And you can see our 2017 distribution or generation. We're largely natural gas now. 10 years ago, we were largely coal, so we're moving much more towards the natural gas. We have about a 20% nuclear footprint, and we have a growing renewables footprint with the rest in coal. So we are advancing our portfolio, and you will hear our CEO, Tom Fanning, talk about all arrows in the quiver. So what does that mean? He is a proponent that we have a diverse portfolio of generation options. We want to make sure that we are moving those options and that we have plenty to look at. And again, I want to tie back to that word optionality that we talked about. We believe that advanced nuclear is one of those options. And so that's the reason that you will see us in forums like this, and we are doing a tremendous amount of R&D work in this field to make sure that we can hopefully help support that being an option in the future. What we expect is that word again, optionality. we expect to be able to go and procure a product from a vendor that's advanced nuclear when we need it, when it's needed to produce that low carbon future for our customers. So the theme really here is what we need as a utility is we need for the industry to prove it. We need to move from concept to concrete. We need to have the technology has to be safe. Okay, that's just part of it. The technology has to be viable and it has to be operational. It's not an option if it hasn't been proven. So in our mind, it has to be in that space. We have to have regulatory certainty. Reduce those risks for the end user. Reduce the risk of cost. When you talk about having confidence in your cost and schedule, we want those to be extremely confident. We want to have a class 1 schedule and cost estimate, right? So that creates for us that green thumbs up, which is optionality for us. That word is different from other folks. Optionality could mean, well, I have a design that's in the conceptual phase, that I have a class 5 estimate, and I feel pretty good about things, and therefore, if I was to get an order, I could produce something in 15 years. Maybe by that time, or 20 years, or this is what I think I can do. But I have high risk in cost area. I have high risk in my schedule. I have high risk in regulatory. So it really depends on what you consider as optionality. But what we consider as optionality is all of these three things together making it for us. So you say, Brandon, well, that's really easy for you to say, right? You just give it everything, take all the risk out and give it to us, right? Well, we recognize that there's an issue here. I mean, there are several big barriers that are in front of the industry in getting to that point of optionality for us. Now, I want to pause just a little bit and talk about why the optionality of getting to that spot for us is so important. I talked earlier about we are a customer-centric utility. Most of our operations are regulated, okay? So we are customer-centric again. And so our driving factors are economics and what is best for the customer. So when you start talking about how we regulate our business, how we make decisions of our business, it's based on the customer need. So going back to, Brandon, it's easy for you to say, we recognize that there's public support and market support that needs to be there. We recognize that an end user would have to put a long-term commitment. Finis, you talked about that earlier in your presentation. It would require a long-term end user commitment to get to that point, right? And it really kind of boils down to, it's this, isn't it? I mean, aren't we in kind of a chicken and the egg syndrome? I don't know who the chicken is or the egg is, but it's, I can't get to this point because I don't have a customer to buy my thing, but my customer doesn't want my thing because it's not to this point. So it is a problem. We understand it. And going back to what I said earlier, Southern wants to be a part of help to get the industry there. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to have optionality for our customers. So here is just an idea that we're thinking about and we wanted to kind of address with you guys. It's this notion of progressive development and deployment. It's an idea that if we can get together as an industry knowing all of the challenges that are before us, the market signals, the sustainable investment mainly, and focus priorities and efforts into getting, I think what I hear in just about every presentation I've been to since I've been looking at SMRs and advanced reactors is we got to have government congressional support. If we can get a body that can drive some of that, I go back to what Mark said earlier, work together. Mark Peters said, he challenged us to think how we can think together to get that bipartisan government support. So this is an idea of how we could get to that point. Progressive development and deployment. Creating a consortium that would drive decisions, that would drive priorities, and that would go after the sustainable funding to move the ball from here to there quicker, hopefully, to produce those optionalities in the future quicker. Now, I hate this slide because it's so busy, but this is kind of a big picture of it. I'm finishing up. I'm ready for questions.
One of your keys there to your optionality is cost certainty.
But was it this slide? Scott,
yeah, that one there.
This slide, Scott?
Cost certainty. There's not really solid cost certainty in some of the other options you have, like natural gas particularly. That's your biggest component. Right now it's pretty inexpensive. We're developing a lot of it. We're also about ready to export a lot of it, and so the price is going to be rising. How confident are you in that? I mean, how does that compare?
So I think you're alluding to the fact that natural gas generation of electricity is not as cost certain because the fuel cost is your driver, right? Okay, so volatility of fuel cost obviously can drive your cost up and down. And that's true. You're absolutely right there. What I'm getting to in advanced reactor space, and going back to even what we're constructing Vogtle 3 and 4 right now, is the big driver in nuclear is not the fuel. Your LCOE is not driven by your fuel costs in nuclear, right?
That's correct.
It's driven by your construction and your operations cost, not your fuel part. Your operations being all your labor, and your construction, your capital expenditure. So the construction cost that I'm talking, or the cost certainty that I'm talking about here, is the cost certainty on how much is it going to cost to put that plant in the ground and run it, notwithstanding the fuel.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think the first two are things we really, really need to work on. Actually, the first one, at least the HDR, is pretty good in some of those. Regulatory uncertainty is a huge issue. But I think if you get past those two, the cost uncertainty goes down and may get in, at least in the range of uncertainty you have with some of your other major options. That's the point.
So it may. And that's, I mean, if you're saying that if I get past these two, then this one is down where I want it to be, then fine. My point is that I need all three of these to get to here. Does that make sense?
Brandon.
Yes, sir.
This is a really excellent presentation, and I just a number of wonderful insights. The thing I'd ask about on the slide with public policy, end user, long-term commitment, sustainable investment, Wind energy has figured out this fantastic deal where they get state governments to mandate that utilities use their technology no matter what the cost is, the renewable portfolio standards. And so I'd be curious, I'm sure you've been engaged at least some, is there any prospect for us to get nuclear included and have those expanded to be clean energy? Because if nuclear were available as an alternative to wind, you'd expect a lot of utilities would probably prefer it since it's a lot easier to integrate. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. It's a great question. We've actually asked it with our folks internally and even some external folks. I think there's always been the question, why is nuclear not considered quote unquote clean, right? I think you can go to, and I forget where this is, but there was a point, at some point, that I think DOE now recognizes SMRs as renewable, right, but not large water reactors. So there's some discussion around that needs to take place. But more to your point, maybe it's not renewables, but can we just call it clean, right? So we've had those discussions. I don't know where they are, and I don't have a lot of insight on kind of where they're going, but we have certainly talked about them. It's mentioned a little bit in, I don't know if you've been able to read the report that Southern Company put out a couple weeks ago on a low carbon future, how we're planning to get there. So we have some insights there on sort of what we're looking to do. In that report, we're talking about an intermediate goal by 2030 of reducing our carbon by 36%, I think. Don't quote me on that. It's somewhere around that vicinity from 2007 levels. And then by 2050 to being a low to no carbon emitter. It's a good read. I would say take a look at it. It's on our website. But there's a little bit of talk in there, not specifically on are we going to make nuclear clean, but it does talk a lot about the drivers of a low carbon future, and it has a lot to do with what I've talked about today on a little bit of the advanced nuclear world, how it has to be a player, and things along that nature.
How do you see the consortium that you talked about being different than the NGMP Alliance?
So that's a good question. This idea of this consortium is sort of new. I think it would be something that would be similar to, would carry some lessons learned from the NGMP Alliance, and it's something that has not been completely put together yet. This is an idea that we want to float to the industry, and this is one of the first forums that we're putting it out to. What we see is that we think that there is a need to really focus the effort of getting things done, and I think Finn has talked a little bit about that. And it's not that things are not getting done; they are, but there are a lot of things getting done in a lot of places, and maybe there's a little bit of priority mixing that can be done.
One of the ground rules Steve Kaczynski has mentioned on forming this advanced reactor consortium is no vendors allowed. So that would be a difference. We argued about that on the beginning of the NGMP Alliance and maybe came out on the wrong side. But so we allowed pretty much everybody who was interested in promoting and implementing the high temperature reactor and associated technologies. That's the mission statement of the Alliance. So by focusing on the utilities, we also had, a utility advisory board for the gas reactor back when, up until about 2007, I think. And I think that had Southern on it, and it had, so it'd be closer to that. I think there were 8 utilities on that advisory board. Fred probably remembers, but that was a good group. And so I think this, where it's clearly end users, whether it be process heat users or electricity users, generating companies, either way, I think the fact that forms would be a great boost to this effort, and I would be happy to see it form even without vendors.
Thanks, Brendan. I'm going to disclose first that I do have Southern shares, so not that many, but I do. I would like to ask about the certainty of the vendor and stability during the construction. Obviously, the local construction with the Westinghouse and the Japanese company upheaval basically, caused a major, freak out by your stakeholders, including the people who own stock, the bondholders. The state regulators also went pretty crazy on this. It wasn't as bad as the SCANA situation, but here you had a design that was being built, demonstrated in China. You've got a well-established vendor, and there was a lot of costs and I'll use the word guarantees for building, and yet it still is disruptive. So my question is, how much certainty do you need, or rather risk insurance? I mean, do we have to have Lloyd's of London insurance to do this? And fortunately, Southern operates in states where regulators are sane, versus California, who said yesterday that everybody's going to have to put solar collectors on their new homes being constructed, which is absurd. So how stable is your operating regions, public utility boards, and how much pushback do you get on like prudency hearings and things like this when hell breaks loose with vendor and construction costs that were totally unexpected? How much certainty do you really need there?
Well, it's a good question. I'll start to answer kind of your last question about sort of the environment of the Public Service Commission. With Vogtle 3 and 4, it's a Georgia Power owned project. It's a regulated public service commission. That was a very challenging situation, no doubt. So the Public Service Commission is it's a very sound commission, very well inside of the project. Does a very good job for Georgia, and so we had to really, as a company, we were fortunate that we had a really good contract, and that we had very good insurance policies. You mentioned the guarantees that we had, and then we were able to convince ourselves and convince the Public Service Commission that we should be able to take over that project from the former owners, the former contractors, and move it along. It was far enough along that I think that helped it. And of course, we were able to get loan guarantees, and so the government helped, and it's shown that we were making progress now, and we were fortunate to be able to do that, and we think it's important. We spent a year working on the decision, basically, to do that, and it's very important that we would do that, because it's very important for our customers. Going back to what I said earlier, we're a customer-centric utility, and so all of those risks, we have to take them out. And it's even more important as we learn from things like Vogtle 3 and 4, we learn more and more. And so we're going to be more adept to, or we're going to be more apt to think about different contract structures and things to take those risks out. So hopefully that answers your question. We do, and even things in our past, we continue to try to learn and to apply that to our customer-centric focus business model. Sure, absolutely. Right, every little bit helps. Nope. One over here. You got it?
So I think this follows on from that previous question. So separate from the technical and regulatory challenges towards, contributing to these challenges, what is the role of project management? towards addressing these? Is there any role that it has to play separate from the technical and regulatory sectors?
In what phase are you talking about in a project? Are you talking about in the early stages of conceptual design? Are you talking about full-blown construction, or somewhere in the middle? That would kind of help me.
Well, don't really have a clear answer to that, so broadly, somewhere in the middle.
Well, I guess what I would say from a project management perspective, applying those principles anywhere in a phase of a project, even in the early stages of the conceptual part from a vendor standpoint, is important because it helps you drive towards where you're going. And not just where you're going, but if you apply the principles correctly, you determine where you're supposed to be going, and then you drive towards that part. And so if you continue down that path all the way through the process of, I'm in concept, and then I'm in pre-concept, I'm in concept, then I'm in more marketing, and whatever that phase is, if you use that as your guiding sort of principles, it helps you to stay on track and not to be more efficient in your process. So hopefully that helps.
Sorry, let me clarify the question. So are there specific challenges or specific adaptations that project management can, or lessons learned from other projects that can be applied to HTR deployment? Are there changes that can be made towards project management to help facilitate this process?
I can't speak of any that I would say could be applied. Finis, it sounds like Finis has probably some really good experience with that.
There was a lessons learned paper out of the St. Lucie 2 experience, which other plants that started construction at the same time in the late 70s and starting up in the early 80s took 10, 15 years to start up, like Comanche Peak, Diablo Canyon, etc. The license number of St. Lucie 2 is 104. It was the 76th plant to start up. From the time we got our construction permit and got docketed, we passed 28 plants. So we have a lessons learned paper. Well, why is that? How did that happen? And one is sort of obvious, which we violated on all of the Gen 3 plants, which was be at least 90% design complete, final design complete before you start turning dirt. Okay. Okaloto, we were at best 10% design complete on final design. Well,